So when we start out talking about the ideas of success, whether you're talking about business, personal goals, whatever it is, we have to understand that there are two really important things to know and two really important things that we have to have a clear concept of before we go out to basically set about anything. And that's number one, we have to know what our goal is. We have to know what our destination is before we can set out on the journey to get there. And number two, we have to know what our plan is. And the way to do that is to sort the goal and then begin working backward from the goal to where we are now, to basically give ourselves a path to follow. Because otherwise what you're doing, if you just have a goal in mind, a destination in mind, you're kind of building a castle up in the clouds with no way to get there. So the steps that we're placing to get there is the plan, and breaking it down into a manageable way to reach from point A to point B. A lot of people get hemmed up at the very beginning of this because they don't have a goal. They don't have a destination. And you'll ask anybody, you know, oh, well, what would you like to be doing? And they might have some sort of vague idea or vague concept of where they'd like to be in 2 years, 3 years, 5 years. But honestly, most of them probably haven't thought about it a lot because they're on autopilot. They're just working a job. They're going out on the weekends. They're doing whatever. A lot of those kind of people are never going to wind up going anywhere. But if you are someone who actually wants to achieve success in your area of life, it is imperative that you figure out what that looks like to you and that you have a really clear conception of exactly where you're going. It's just like a GPS. You know, if you set out to go somewhere and you can't punch in an address for it, it's not going to be able to set you a pathway to get there because you have no clear conception of where you're going. You're just fucking driving around. So after you figure out those two things, you have to understand that once you figure out what it is that you actually want to do, if you already know what that is and you're still sitting around doing some kind of bullshit work, we have to understand this idea as want. We have to break it down further than that and say, okay, well, this may be a goal that you desire, but there's a big difference between desiring something and actively willing something. Active will involves not only being focused on that concept and sort of having it in your field of vision at all times, but it also involves doing the things that you know you have to do in order to get there. So a goal is fucking no good and a plan is no good if you have zero action and you have zero drive and zero will to actually wind up getting there. You're going to wind up breaking down somewhere on the side of the road on your way there, or you may never even set out on your journey. So, you know, in a lot of these things, you know, people have sent me several books to read and articles to look at and things to watch. And one of the things that I've heard the most in any of these sort of diatribes on success is that people say, you know, you are what you think about. And I think that that's true, but I also think, as my wife is always sort of telling me, that you have to look where you want to go as well, because our thoughts don't just come necessarily from nowhere. They come from what we put in here. So, you know, I can't count the number of guys in my life that say, oh, you know, I want to be in a committed relationship, or I want to get stronger, or I want to make more money, but their actions tell you something completely different. You know, the same guys who say that they want to be in a committed relationship or that they're happy with their old lady are the same guys who can't fucking stop hitting up girls on Instagram and you know, looking at chicks on the internet. The same guys that tell you they want to get strong are the same guys that would rather watch Game of Thrones and not pick up the phone when you call them to go bench press. You know who you are. If you're saying that you want to make more money or be more successful in business, but you're always out spending your money and spending your time at the bar, wasting your time, you're saying with your actions the exact opposite of what you're saying with your words, and you have to step back from the situation and realize that actually what you want, actually what you are willing, is the same existence that you're currently living, because you are putting in no actions toward this goal. So there's a huge difference between desire and actualizing your will and having, you know, the intention behind what you're doing. So, you know, there's a good little lesson to be learned here, especially in the age of technology, that if you're watching this, it's hoped that you're sort of an individual who is looking to progress and to better themselves in a lot of different areas, however you wind up finding this video. But that one of the important things that we're talking about here is, what are you consuming? What are you taking in on a day-to-day level? What Instagram pages are you following? As sort of ridiculous and banal as that sounds, it matters. You know, the things that you put into your mind when you wake up and you're sort of scrolling through your feed, and that word always, I get stuck on that. You know, it's like your feed, like a cow. You know, what are you eating? Because the things that you consume become a part of you. Just like with the food that we eat, it literally becomes a part of your body. The same thing with the things that our mind eats. It becomes a part of who we are, and our thoughts will spring forth from the seeds that get planted in there. So we have to be aware, and we have to guard our minds against unwanted weeds growing up in that garden. So consider that when you're watching YouTube or looking at Facebook or you're on your Instagram or whatever. What are you putting in there? And are those things consonant with what you have stated your goals and your actualized plan is? If not, don't waste your time, because you have to be a fanatic about this. You know, you have to look at your mission plan, your goal, as a fucking jihad, and you have to do everything in your power to get there. And if you're not a fanatic about it, you're probably not going to reach your goals. The other thing that you have to realize is, as my friend Jack Donovan says, you know, and you can look at this fantastic article that he wrote about this called All Training is Sacrifice. If you want something, you have to be prepared to suffer for it. You have to be prepared to put in the time, and you have to be prepared to realize that anything that you are going to achieve, especially great things, they come at a big cost. They come at a high sacrifice. We have to pay out for the things that we decide we want, and we have to pay for those things in blood, sweat, tears, time, dedication, and all that kind of stuff. So if you're not prepared to sacrifice and to make those adjustments in your life in order to get the things that you want, again, you're going to fall by the wayside, and you're never going to achieve that, because you don't understand that you have to spend, you have to sacrifice to get the things that you want. And the bigger the thing that you want, the more you're going to have to sacrifice. So in order to attain success, your mind always has to be on that thing. You know, most guys that I know, or a lot of guys that I know anyway, who, you probably have friends like this, who can't ever quite seem to get there, wherever it is that they're trying to get. You know, they may always be trying to get women, they may always be trying to get money, they may always be trying to get this, and they always seem to kind of stumble and stagger somewhere along the way. I find that a lot of the time it's because their mind is on the wrong aspect of the goal. You know, we can take this kind of in a pretty low road, and we can say, you know, a lot of guys spend a lot of their time thinking about pussy. They're always thinking about, oh, I want to go out and I want to get chicks, I want to get this, I want to get that. And what happens is that dwelling on that one thing, this really like low attainment, it blocks them from the real goal, which is, if these same guys who are always out trying to say, oh, I want to get better women, I want to get better looking women, I want to get better this, better that, if they were spending as much time pursuing self-improvement, success, real strength, cultivating meaningful relationships, those things would all come their way. And what they don't understand is that if they were just focusing on themselves and improving themselves and chasing success, they would never have to chase another woman in their life. And also, they would be attracting the best kind of women. They'd be attracting the best kind of friends, and they'd be attracting, more importantly, more success. Because when you start to set positive habits for yourself, you slip into a mode of sort of overcoming. Victory is a mindset. And, you know, I've said this in one of my videos before, you know, overcoming is a mindset that you have to wake up in. And when you start to dig those trenches and those channels for those, you know, those waters to flow through, it opens it up, and it makes it a continuous process of overcoming and victory. And it's sort of like it feeds into itself. You know, the more you have, the more you will wind up getting. So really thinking about the avenues that you're taking towards the goals that you've set for yourself is very important, that we don't get sidetracked with sort of the easy kill. You know, a lot of my friends are hunters, and they say sometimes you have to watch a few go by in order to get the one that you wanted. So keeping your goal in mind and keeping your goals high is a very important aspect of this. And how you define success can be really important too. I always say, you know, to my friends that we have to be realistic in our definition of success, even if our goals aren't realistic. I think your goals should be huge. You should always dream big, and you should always set your goals very high. But the way that you define success is pretty important. A couple years back, I was out on tour playing music, and that was what I was doing for all my money at the time. And I was just playing music, selling merch, all that kind of stuff. And I was out on tour with two of my friends, and we were talking about what does it mean to be a successful musician. And one of my friends was talking about how, you know, he does that for work. When he goes home, he doesn't have a job. This is just what he does. And we started thinking about it. We said, you know, I wonder, out of everybody who's ever picked up a guitar and played a few notes, how many of those people stuck with it and actually learned the instrument? Out of that many people, how many do you think, say, wrote their own song? Out of how many people wrote their own song, how many do you think performed that in front of somebody? How many of those people then were paid to perform that? And out of all the ones that were paid to perform that song, how many recorded, went on tour, and on and on and on? And so you see this funnel start to come down and down and down until you realize that if you're out there getting paid and making money to be a musician, you are successful, and you're probably in the top, I don't know, 5% of musicians all around the world, if our definition of musician is someone who's ever picked up and played some notes on a guitar. So your definition of success has to be realistic, even if your goals are very big. And you know, one of the other things to look at when we talk about success is people will set a lot of blockades in your way by putting out a lot of myths. And I want to start here by saying that, you know, for the last 3 or 4 years, I realized that, you know, with all my fancy tattoos and my fancy clothes and stuff like that, some people might be saying, okay, well, who the fuck is this guy, and why should I have any give a shit about what he says about any of this stuff on this topic? Well, I've been self-employed now for about 4 or 5 years, about 4 years, and in that time I have occasionally deviated back into the normal world of work for little short forays. But in the last year and a half, since I decided to really crank down and start my business, I have been working exclusively for myself. Had a great year this past year in my first year of running business, which most people will tell you, you know, a lot of businesses don't make profit in their first year. Well, mine sure as shit has. And I'm setting up to have a fantastic year next year. I've made my living as a musician before. I currently make my living essentially just being myself. So, you know, there's probably not a lot of people in the world that can say that, and so I consider myself to be a success based on my understanding of what that means, which is I'm doing exactly what I want to do, and I'm getting paid to do exactly what it is that I want to do. That's the true definition, in my opinion, of success, is, are you doing exactly what you want to do, and is that making you your living? That's how we should define our understanding of success. So, you know, the last thing kind of to go over here when we discuss, you know, our concepts of this is that we have to be ready to put in the action, and we have to understand that putting in time is crucial to what we're talking about here. If you say to yourself one day, I want to be a jiu-jitsu instructor, that's a fantastic goal. It's a very lofty goal. If you say, I want to be a jiu-jitsu black belt, that's great. But you got to understand, you have to start doing jiu-jitsu. You can't just sit there and fucking say, okay, here's my destination, beam me up, Scotty. It's not going to happen. You have to put in the work, and you have to be driven to do that work every single day you wake up. The way that I do this, and what works for me to accomplish this, is every single night before I go to bed, I take out one of my notebooks. I've got an article about this or whatever, you know, notebook's very important to me. And I write down exactly what I'm going to accomplish the next day. I write out anything I was dissatisfied with about how I did that day, the current day, and I write out about how I'm going to change it and how I'm not going to do that and I'm going to do this instead. I've got another article that, you know, this is another strategy that I've seen done. This is not revelatory information, but it's something that I've done to great success with myself. Is I've written down who I am right now as far as what I don't like about myself, and I write out in another column who I want to be. And I do that usually around the start of every year. And every time I meet a situation, I think about this right side column. And I say, okay, I got to meet this situation being this guy that I want to be, this guy who I say that I am, and I have to keep who I say that I am in line with who it is that I actually am and how I really act in any given situation. Keeping our goals written down and in front of us at all times is crucial to success. We have to stay the course, and if we have no tangible thing to look at and say this is the goal, we're also not going to achieve that. That's our blueprint. So what you can do is, after you watch this video, if you're trying to get somewhere in life, what I want you to do is I want you to take whatever that is, whatever that goal is, and write it down. Write down that big, huge goal, that big dream, that castle in the sky. And then what I want you to do is start working backward from there and saying, what's the step right before that? And what's the step right before that? And I want you to do this like a little flow chart until those steps reach all the way back to where you are right now. And then what I want you to do is every single day, when you wake up, when you go to bed, whatever, I want you to look at those steps, and I want you to ask whether or not you did shit that day to work those steps, to get towards that goal, whatever that goal is. You know, you may have separate ones. You may have goals for, you know, your strength and conditioning. You may have goals for your business. You have goals for your relationships. You have goals for self-improvement. Whatever it is, you need to stay single-minded, and you need to look at those steps, and you need to realize that if you are not taking action, definable action towards those steps, towards that castle that you've built every single day, what you're doing is you're willing yourself to remain in exactly the same place. And you're always going to be in that same place until you start taking those steps every single day. So get out there and kick ass, and make sure that, you know, you look at your goals, you know what your goal is, you know what your plan is, and that you're treating that goal like a fanatic. You know, everybody doesn't deserve success. Nobody deserves anything. In the gym, you don't deserve anything but the work you put in. It's just like anything else, business, whatever. You only deserve what you put into it. So get out there and put it in and be successful.